Welcome to Eyes on Books. I'm John Peters with my co-host, Terry Kalshall. Hi, Terry, how are you?
I'm great. Good morning to you and to the audience. And first we're here to discuss our book, Desert Deadline.
Right, by Michael Kraft.
Yes. Now, I hear that you know Michael Kraft.
I do.
So I was wondering, before we start discussing the book in detail, if you could tell us a little bit about Michael Kraft.
Sure. Michael was a member of the Palm Springs Writers Guild, and I served as president for a little over 3 years of that guild. And I met Michael as he was starting out really getting serious about writing books. And through the guild and through meeting people, he developed quite a network of individuals who he associated with and helped him and refined his technique. And here's his 20th, I believe, edition of a book. I think his 21st is coming out this fall.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. So now let's delve into the book.
Well, the book is, I think, rather interesting. It's got a lot of characters, and I don't think any group has really been marginalized at all. I mean, we have Dante, who's a concierge, who's white and gay, and we have Jazz, who's African American and getting out of a failed marriage and has a son. And we have Mauve, who's this romance mystery writer. I mean, there's just all sorts of characters in this book. And it kind of grabs your attention right away with all the different people and what they're doing and how they're trying to do it.
The two main characters, though, are Dante and Jazz.
Yes.
And I believe the two main characters, Dante and Jazz, are carried throughout all of his books.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay. Now, I found this book to be a rather easy read.
Yes, that somewhat surprised me too when I went through it. It was a very easy read. In fact, it was almost like reading newspaper or magazine. It just flowed very simply and it was easy to follow. So anyone who's worried about being able to follow through on this book shouldn't have any difficulties at all.
And it took a couple of different pathways, but the main gist of the story is that a murder does occur.
Yes.
And we do finally get to a murder. We can't give that storyline away, of course. But Jazz, who is a private eye, has to figure out who happened to she solves the murder, plain and simple.
She does, and it's interesting how she went about it. And there's some other characters in this too. And it starts out going with some background over in Palm Springs area. A lot of it's in Indian Wells, along Highway 111, and I lived there for quite a while. And I will tell you that anyone who's familiar with the Coachella Valley will be able to picture many of these places in their mind's eye as they're reading the book. I mean, he does bring that part really alive. The geography comes to life.
And Dante teams up with Jazz to help solve it.
Yes, and that's sort of an odd combination, as the readers will find. It's sort of a non sequitur in some respects. It just doesn't seem to fit, but it works out very well.
The storyline, like I said, there are like little tributaries that take off of the storyline. And Jazz has a daughter, not a son, but the daughter gets into a little bit of trouble.
Yes.
And so they have to solve that mystery as well when the daughter gets into trouble. And so they have to go and find her because she disappears mysteriously.
Yes.
And they have to figure out why she disappeared and then go find her. And so you have to go along on that little storyline. And then the murder occurs. And you have to say, oh my gosh, why? Why did that murder happen?
Not only why did that murder happen, but it happens to someone you really don't think it's going to happen to.
Yes.
And that was sort of the surprise in the beginning for me. I was really on track to go one way, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's this murder. And I couldn't quite figure out the role that was playing. But by the time you get to the end of the book, it all comes together.
Who is this person who even got murdered? You start thinking, wait a minute, does this person even really exist?
Right. And that's kind of a mystery within the mystery itself, because there's this big buildup, and you know, we're told repeatedly, oh, the person's coming, the person's going to be here. And you know, Dante rents, because he's a concierge, he rents out this little vacation rental, and two characters show up, and we're continually waiting on that third character, and all the props that they bring with them, and how they're going to, this romance writer is going to finish the book. It almost sounds like this person's coming out of Beverly Hills, coming to the desert, and that's part of the mystery too.
And they come, and then they leave. And then they come, and then they leave. But nobody sees them.
That's right. And that is a little suspicious in and of itself. And for me, it started to play on my own mind, saying, okay, what's going on here? Why are they here? Why are they going? Why aren't they doing more? What's this story about the contract and having to have this last chapter or so of the book written to get it finished by this deadline? So there was a lot of questions to be asked throughout the book. And again, it all comes together in a rather surprising way.
And meanwhile, there's this neighbor who is doing what's called a death cleaning.
Yes.
And she has a maid who is helping with the death cleaning, but this maid is holding like this death grip on this woman. And you're wondering, what is going on with this relationship?
Absolutely. And as you read part of it, you think some of these people are just simply nosy and controlling. And part of that's true. And the twists and turns to get the information and who knows what, and suddenly somebody knows something they weren't supposed to know. But then you find out, oh no, so-and-so told them that. And it's pretty much that part of the mystery. But Jazz and Dante do get it resolved. Jazz more so than Dante, but they work as a good team.
They sure do. It was quite an incredible story. And like I said, that was another tributary that story went off on. And everything got pulled together in the end. And we did discover who the murderer was, but it was somebody you just never expected.
I was totally surprised. I really was. And the motive behind it was surprising. I didn't see that coming. But once everything's exposed, it makes perfect sense. It really does.
I guess we're going to have to prepare for our Zoom meeting.
Yes, I think Michael is probably waiting for us to ask him some questions.
Okay, well, let's get to it.
All right.
Thanks. Michael, my name is Terry, and then I have a friend of yours across the table from me who is John Peters. I believe you worked with him And
Yes.
yes.
Hello, John. Hello, Terry.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
And we just finished reviewing your book, Desert Deadline.
I hope you liked it.
We found it rather interesting. It was a nice, easy read,
I'm glad to hear that.
which we appreciated. So, but now we would like to hear from you. I believe this was what, your 20th book?
Desert Deadline is my 19th
Your
book,
19th
my
book.
19th novel. My 20th is in the works right now. It will be the sequel to Desert Deadline, and it is titled Desert Reunion, featuring many of the same people, but in an entirely different, deadly circumstances. But yes, Desert Deadline is number 19. It is the second in the Dante and Jazz mystery series.
Well, I made that mistake. I gave you one more book that you haven't written yet, so hurry up and catch up.
Well, in my mind, I've written 20, but the one we're talking about today is the 19th that has been published.
All right, very good.
So where does all your inspiration come from?
Well, the setting primarily, the Palm Springs area, I think lends itself so well as a background to virtually any story. But I think using it as the setting for a murder mystery is sort of ingenious, if I say so myself, because it's known as a sunny paradise, and murder by its nature tends to be rather dark and ugly. So it makes a beautiful contrast for troubled times.
A dark setting? I thought it was a beautiful setting.
Oh, I may have said it backwards.
Okay.
It makes a bright and beautiful setting for a story that has dark overtones or undertones, maybe.
You know, I think your characters are really pretty creative and incredible.
I think one of the things that I like, Michael, having spent time in the Coachella Valley, geographically, you paint pictures in people's minds if they're familiar with Highway 111 or Indian Wells or any of the places you take people. I thought that was a very good way of describing the various settings, and I think people can relate to that.
Well, thank you, John. I mean, I try not to overload the story with too many specifics like that, but I think any reader, especially if they know the area, want to have those benchmarks along the way that allow them to make a very, very real connection to the story as it's being told, because I know that. I was there. I've been there lots of times, whatever. Other readers, of course, have never been here. So there's no reason, for instance, to describe, every shop along the street or whatever. You don't need to paint that literal a picture to get the narrative across. But but a few highlights along the way seem to make it more real.
Well, a follow-up to Terry's question, I know from our experience at the Writers Guild in Palm Springs that you've always had an interest in writing. Could you share with the audience a little bit about how you really got started as a writer, which is sort of a follow-up to Terry's question about motivation and this series?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. This goes back quite a while. Let's see, 40 years ago, I was working in Chicago at the Chicago Tribune, not as a reporter and not as a writer, but as a graphic designer. And during a good portion of the time that I worked there, I was living in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which involved a very long commute on a train every day. And this was before the era of laptops. So I was just basically sitting there for what amounted to 4 hours a day with my briefcase in my lap, wondering what to do with that time. Many people read, of course, but I had always had sort of an itch to write. And working at the Tribune, I came in contact with a lot of writers. I worked right in the newsroom, and people encouraged me to give it a try. And so around my 30th birthday, I got a bunch of how-to manuals on how to write the American novel, that kind of thing, took notes, and then just started working out a plot that would eventually become my first murder mystery, the first of my Mark Manning mysteries, titled Flight Dreams. And I drafted the novel in longhand on legal pads on the train. And when I got home every night, I would transcribe that by typewriter, onto pages of a manuscript that I saw kind of stack up on a day-to-day basis. And it took me, I forget exactly how long, if it was 6 months or maybe a year to draft the novel. It came out very long, longer than it should have been. And at that point, I simply didn't know what I was doing. But I stuck with it and started sending it around to possible agents and publishers, and got a lot of rejections. I think 28 to be specific. It took me 12 years to find a home for my first novel, but it finally happened. And after that, it became much easier because I was over that hump of being unpublished. And it was around that time that I caught the interest of a New York agent, literary agent. His name is Mitchell Waters. He's now represented me for over 25 years. And together, we're pushing 20 novels together. So that's the long answer to a short question.
But a very good one. Thank you.
That's pretty incredible. Is there anything else you want us to know about you?
About you or your background, Michael? Anything else you want to share with us?
About my background?
No, background or writing or
Anything.
anything,
Well,
the help you got along the way or
should-
whatever might happen.
It will be obvious to anyone who picks up the book that I am gay. And while I don't think of myself as writing exclusively to a gay audience by any means, I write to a general audience. Since most of my books have a first-person narration, meaning the main character actually tells the story in his own head and referring to himself as I, readers are certainly going to assume that there's a bit of me in every character like that who I write. And so all of my writing has been told through what I would simply describe as a gay lens. This is the way I see the world. This is the way I interpret actions and the speech of others. So I mean that's very important to understand from the outset about me and what I write. It's not a crusade. It's just simply a fact. That's who I am, and it's reflected in my writing. And so I'm glad you asked that.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
You certainly had a diversified set of characters in the book.
I love to do that. I mean, but think about it this way, John. Like at some point, at various junctures in my writing career, I've written female protagonists, main characters who are women, and that's really not all that unusual for an author. For an author of fiction, the book is always populated by a large cast of characters, and they're not, for instance, in my case, all gay white males. You can't do that and keep the story interesting. I mean, the world is full of men and women. The world is full of people of many races and cultures and of different sexual orientations as well. So I paint from a very broad palette when I'm organizing the story from the outset. For instance, I am one of those writers who really truly believes in outlining and planning and researching first. And so by the time that I'm actually ready to write the novel, or draft the novel more technically, the story is all laid out in front of me, and I always know what's next. But the reason I bring this up is that from the outset, I'm planning how many characters I have to deal with, how many slots I have to fill in a plot, and I very deliberately keep a list of the characters I'm creating. It's sort of a directory or a cast of characters for the story. And I'll check certain surface issues like, do too many names begin with the same letter or something like that. I want to make the characters as distinct as possible in people's minds. So I don't want characters' names to sound alike. And then taking that thinking a little further, I change characteristics of the characters to make them all the more different from each other. And, some are men, some are women, some are bad, some are good. Some are Latino, some are, in this case, Asian. I try to make as many different types of people as possible. I think it's a good reflection of the world, but from a more important and practical standpoint as a writer, it's a device that allows me to keep the characters distinct in my readers' minds. They know this. So-and-so is a lawyer. So-and-so is a pool boy, and little details like that. As specific as occupations or as general as race and culture.
Well, that was a good description, because when you read the book, it's so straightforward and easy to read. It's nice to hear how much planning you've done before you put the first word on paper. That was very, very helpful. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, John. I mean, and all of those devices and machinations that go on in the background should never, of course, be apparent to the reader, but it should have the effect that we've just discussed. It makes the story flow, it makes the story easier to grasp, and it certainly makes everyone easier to keep track of.
I'm really impressed. It's very insightful, what you just told us.
Well, we try, Terry. And I've written 20 of these now, published 19. And I will have to say, that with age and experience comes a bit of wisdom. And I feel I know what I'm doing now, in a sense that I had no idea, as opposed to having no idea what I was doing when I got started. There were a lot of flops and failures along the way, but I think I won't say I've mastered this, but I've progressed with it through the years.
Oh, what's interesting, Michael, knowing you from the years that I was with the Writers Guild, you always had an open mind, and you always sought assistance, and you always sought new ideas, and you weren't afraid to have somebody critique you or make suggestions. And it's been interesting for me to watch your growth. That short time that I was with the Writers Guild as president, you've grown a lot, and obviously with having written 20 books, you didn't have number 20 written when we were at the Writers Guild, so you've done a remarkable job.
Well, thank you, John. And you mentioned something that I would like to reinforce. When we were involved together in the Palm Springs Writers Guild, which was just it's a collective of writers of varying levels of experience who either aspire to write or who have written. But it is I think it's so essential in a writer's training to have that networking with other writers or would-be writers, perhaps taking a workshop course or get into a critique group where other people who share your interest in committing words to the page and creating plots on paper. The feedback that you can get from sympathetic associates is just simply invaluable. And it's a journey I think that every would-be writer should try to take. Seek out a group. I mean, any town, large or small, usually has some sort of writers group where they welcome new writers with open arms and encourage them to share each other's work, critique each other's work. And that's really one of the best ways to learn, other than reading, of course. I mean, it's always said you have to learn to read before you can learn to write. There's a lot to that. But just simply being an avid reader does not necessarily mean you're going to be a great writer. Because, as we've discussed, there are things that go on in the background that the writer does that the reader is not necessarily and even shouldn't be aware of. So the would-be writer has to learn those things, or is better off if he or she learns those things. And the way to do that is to associate with other writers. So that was a wonderful experience that I had with the Writers Guild in Palm Springs. But that's not the only place to get it. There are many available outlets.
Well, that's good advice, Michael, and we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. I'll give it back to Terry.
Thank you so much for your time. There it is, Desert
Buy the
Deadline.
book. That's the message here.
Well, we have it here on our table, front and center. Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate your time. You've been a dream.
My pleasure, Terry. And
Okay.
a pleasure to meet you today, and a pleasure to see John again. It's been a while.
It has.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on Eyes on Books. We look forward to seeing you again next month.
We thank you for tuning in to Eyes on Books. And if you have any books that you think might make an interesting discussion or authors who are good speakers, we'd love to hear your suggestions. Contact us at eyesonbooks@yahoo.com and keep watching.